It was the 4th year of being with Steve Madden. He grew tired of my dullness and monotony. He was captivated by a young, trendy girl. But he told his friends, "It's just a fling. Of course, I'll marry a good girl like Hayley Kirby." With the wedding imminent, everyone advised me to consider the bigger picture. The most rebellious among us, Dearden, stopped me and said, "Good girl, dare to be rebellious for once?" At the wedding 3 days later, Steve saw the kiss mark on my neck and was so angry he couldn't even hold the bouquet steady. I smiled faintly. "It's just a fling, why are you so mad? Besides, after tasting it, I realized you're quite boring, not as exciting as him." Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. After arriving at the bar, I stood dumbfounded outside the private room, staring at the scene inside. I had never seen Steve Madden like this. Always elegant and gentlemanly, the young master of the Madden family was now with his shirt buttons undone, lazily leaning on the sofa. A pretty girl with pink-dyed hair boldly straddled his waist, tilting her face up to kiss him passionately. His eyes were hazy with drunkenness, and he seemed lost in desire. Yet, at the last moment, he turned his face, letting the kiss land on his cheek. Someone beside him laughed and said, "Steve, aren't you afraid Hayley Kirby will find out about your wild behavior?" Steve looked indifferent. "It's just a fling." "So what if she knows?" "True, you're about to have your wedding, and the invitations are already sent out. She's such a good girl, at most, she'll just cry a bit." Steve smiled nonchalantly. "I know what I'm doing. Of course, I'll marry her, the good girl. But it's more fun to keep mistresses who are charming and seductive." The people around laughed uproariously, creating a chaotic scene. Steve slightly curled his lips, pinched the soft face of the girl on him. "Change into your ballet practice outfit and give them a show." The girl giggled sweetly, "But I only want to wear it for you." Steve smiled too, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Be good, don't spoil the fun." The girl pouted and went to change. I stood outside the door for a long time until someone came out to take a phone call and saw me. "Hayley? Steve is drunk, he was just talking about you." I took a step back. "I won't go in. I don't want to disturb him watching the dance." The person looked a bit awkward, momentarily at a loss for words. This was probably the first time I had shown any temper, which surprised him. As they said, I was known in our circle as a good girl. Steve's recent wild behavior was well known among his acquaintances. But every one of them, without exception, advised me to endure. How can men not have wandering hearts? At least Steve is attentive to you. The wedding is coming up soon, you need to think about the big picture and the reputation of both families. I found it laughable. They want me, the victim, to be the one to protect the reputation of both families? You guys have fun, I'm leaving. "Hayley, Steve is just playing around with them. Don't follow me." I held back my tears and walked away quickly. But just as I reached the elevator, someone stopped me. Wiping my tears, I frowned at the man in front of me. It was Dearden, a notorious playboy with a terrible reputation in our circle. He was wearing a black jacket and matching cargo pants. His gaze was bold and unrestrained. In a place filled with elegance, his outfit was completely out of place. I had heard many unsavory rumors about him. Instinctively, I took a step back to keep my distance. "Good girl," Vince raised an eyebrow at me, "dare to be rebellious just once?" I was wearing a light blue dress with a small square collar. My hair was long and straight, and I wore light makeup. I was the epitome of a lady in the eyes of the elders. But in private, I was often ridiculed and seen as weak and easily bullied. Vince had a rebellious look, and there was a fresh scar on his sharp jawline. On that handsome face of his, it added a touch of recklessness. I originally did not want to pay him any attention. But Dearden sneered and looked down, saying, "Forget it, I know you wouldn't dare, it's boring." I turned halfway and then turned back. "Who says I wouldn't dare?" Vince tossed the car keys in his hand. "Come with me?" I clutched my handbag, straightened my back, and walked into the elevator without a sideways glance. Vince chuckled and followed me into the elevator. The moment the elevator doors closed, Vince reached out and wrapped his arm around my waist. He pulled me directly into his embrace. His scent was very different from Steve's. His strong hormonal presence was overwhelming. Even the smell of smoke was more intense. I felt a bit uncomfortable and coughed lightly a few times. Vince looked down at me and said, "So delicate." It's because the smell of smoke on you is too strong. I frowned and tried to push him away. But Vince's grip tightened a bit more. Sorry to trouble you, I'll take a shower later. A shower won't help, the smell will still be there after smoking. I turned my face away, wrinkling my nose and trying to distance myself from him. Vince chuckled, then suddenly lowered his head and gave me a kiss. I'll quit today, okay, my dear? My face felt hot. I got engaged to Steve Madden when I was 19. It's been 4 years now. Vince was the first man to kiss me besides him. When we arrived at the underground parking lot, the heat on my face had not subsided. Vince was driving a Hummer. He drove out of the city and onto the mountain road, speeding up and eventually reaching the top of the mountain. My heart was pounding, it was uncomfortable yet thrilling. That kind of pleasure was hard to describe. Vince opened the car door and helped me out. Can you stand? My legs were a bit weak, but I managed to walk, so I pushed his hand away and walked forward. Vince didn't insist. The viewing platform at the top of the mountain overlooked the entire city. The lights of thousands of homes were beneath my feet, and above was the vast, endless starry sky. The stuffy feeling in my heart suddenly dissipated by more than half. Vince stood next to me and took out a pack of cigarettes. But then he seemed to think of something and simply crushed the cigarette pack and threw it into the trash can. I watched his action and somehow started to laugh. What are you laughing at? Vince's tone was a bit fierce. He turned around, reached out, and pinched my jaw. Hayley Kirby, if you laugh like that, I won't be able to resist taking you right here. I heard that Vince had a string of girlfriends since middle school. He's a fickle person, always playing around. But he happens to have a charming appearance, and many girls cry and beg to be with him. I was actually a bit anxious inside, but I pretended to be calm. Vince, there's nothing wrong with you, right? What, do you want me to go to the hospital now for a full-body checkup? Vince pinched my chin and leaned in, his hot breath brushing against my earlobe. Scared now? Don't you think it's a bit too late? When he said that, I couldn't help but really start to feel scared. I raised my hand and pushed him hard. Vince, I want to go home. Fine. He let go of me, his tall and strong body lazily leaning against the railing. His voice was lazy, with a hint of mischief. If you want to go home, walk back by yourself. I held back my anger, gave him a fierce glare, and turned to walk down the mountain. A few days ago, a serial killer escaped. They say he fled to this mountain. The killer specifically targets pretty girls, first raping them, then dismembering them. Vince. My steps came to an abrupt halt. A cold mountain wind blew by, and I was so scared that I didn't care about anything else and ran back to Vince. He laughed but then grabbed me tightly. Before I could recover from the fright, Vince cupped the back of my head and kissed me deeply. At first, I resisted and struggled. I even bit Vince's lip, drawing blood. Hayley Kirby. He wiped the blood away with his hand, but his gaze was a bit cold. My eyes were red, filled with fear and grievance. I want to go home. Vince suddenly laughed. Go home, and continue being a puppet? Hayley, how much more can you endure? I was stunned. Steve was the rising star praised by the elders, a refined and elegant young talent. But his true nature in private was so unbearable. Everyone advised me to endure, no one advised him not to betray and hurt his future wife. Just because the Madden family's status was higher, and the Kirby family was trying to climb up? Why should I consider the bigger picture? Just because the invitations were sent out and the wedding was in 3 days? No one would care if a puppet was heartbroken. A child who lost her mother actually lost her biological father at the same time. No one loved her, no one stood up for her, so she had no courage to cry or make a fuss. Hayley, Vince's rough finger pads wiped away the tear stains from the corners of my eyes. When he lowered his head to kiss me again, I heard a very soft sentence, "Don't cry, from now on, I'll take care of you." Vince took me back to his place. He lived alone in a luxurious penthouse in the city center. He had bought and connected 2 adjacent units on the top floor, making it very spacious, yet also quite empty. When I entered, I noticed that there didn't seem to be any signs of a woman's presence. He turned off my phone and told me to take a bath. After I finished bathing, we drank a little red wine on the terrace. I rarely drink, so even I didn't know that I could get so drunk. I started pulling at Vince's robe. "I need to check first if you're clean." I mumbled, while my hands kept moving. At first, Vince seemed to try to stop me, but when I glared at him, he let go and leaned back, spreading his long legs, letting me do as I pleased. Vince's body was truly top-notch. His skin was a bit tanned, and his muscles were firm and well-defined. Even in a relaxed state, he had six-pack abs. I reached out and poked them, then moved my hand lower. "Hayley," Vince caught my fingers, his voice was a bit hoarse. "Think carefully, 1 more inch, and there's no turning back. Are you scared? Or are you feeling guilty?" I straddled his thighs, patting his abs, looking down at him, afraid I'll find out you're not clean? Vince suddenly laughed. This laugh was different from the previous times. It was pure, joyful, and heartfelt. I felt a flutter in my chest. He was truly handsome. "Hayley, go ahead and check." He let go of my hand. I struggled to tear my gaze away from his face. Then, inch by inch, I moved my hand lower from his abdomen. "Vince, it looks kind of cute." Vince suddenly started coughing. The next moment, he scooped me up horizontally. Our bodies sank into the soft bed. Vince clasped my fingers, kissing me with a bit of force and dominance. "Hayley, you'll soon know how terrifying it can be." Steve returned to the wedding house at 3 in the morning. When the young girl who danced ballet and was bold and avant-garde changed her clothes and started dancing again, the atmosphere in the private room instantly reached its peak. But his mood started to drop at that moment. It was already close to 2. But Hayley hadn't called him, nor sent a single message. Perhaps, as their wedding approached, he was feeling trapped and had indulged himself a bit too much. Maybe Hayley had caught wind of some rumors. But she was always soft-tempered, and her family treated her poorly. She always relied on him. As his friends said, if she got angry, a little coaxing would make it better. He knew he had gone a bit too far, but he wasn't too worried. No calls or messages didn't matter, Hayley must still be awake, waiting for him to come home. Steve suddenly found the girl in front of him a bit uninteresting. Hayley had also learned ballet as a child. But when she danced ballet, she never had this kind of expression. How to describe it? Sacred. Yes, sacred. A girl like that was the one he wanted to marry, the one worthy of being his wife. When the driver took him back to the wedding house, the whole place was dark. Steve frowned slightly. He felt a bit uneasy as he got out of the car. He entered the main building, walked through the living room, and headed to the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. The door to the master bedroom was half open. He walked in and turned on the light. The warm light filled the entire room. The large wedding bed was neatly made, but Hayley was not there. Steve's drunkenness suddenly sobered up a lot. He quickly walked to the bathroom, then checked each room. She was nowhere to be found. Finally, he stopped and dialed Hayley's number. But it was turned off. Steve suddenly felt an inexplicable irritability. He threw down his phone, pulled off his tie, and sat on the sofa. Hayley must be really angry and probably went back to her own home. Yes, she could only have gone back to the Kirby home. Steve suddenly felt relieved. The Kirby family would only urge her to come back immediately. The Kirby family was even more eager for this wedding. He was very tired, his head aching badly. If Hayley were home, she would make him some soup, give him a massage, and prepare a bath. But she wasn't here tonight. But it didn't matter, at the latest, by tomorrow morning, the Kirby family would personally send her back. And this time, feeling a bit guilty, he would properly coax her. In front of her family, he would give her enough face. She was easy to coax, and he knew that better than anyone. When I woke up, it was almost noon. The house was quiet, and I had no idea where Vince had gone. I lay in bed for a while longer before lazily getting up. After washing up, I went out to the terrace to get some fresh air. From there, I saw Vince downstairs in the garden, washing a heavy motorcycle with his shirt off. The sunlight was perfect, and there was even a faint rainbow in the mist from the high-pressure water gun. But the most captivating sight was Vince himself. His honey-colored, firm muscles had smooth, impeccable lines. He wore simple jeans, with the waistband slightly loose, revealing his strong, sculpted waist and abdomen. It was a wild, primal kind of sexiness, brimming with vitality. I couldn't help but think of the wild night we had. His performance in bed matched his appearance and persona perfectly. I couldn't even remember how many times I nearly blacked out. And Vince kept asking me, "Hayley, isn't it cutie? Do you like it?" Just as my cheeks were burning, Vince turned off the water and casually glanced up. Our eyes met, and I felt my face get even hotter. Instinctively, I wanted to retreat, but Vince called out my name, "Hayley." He leaned against the motorcycle, casually pushing his damp hair back. His handsome face was fully revealed. In the sunlight, he smiled at me, a carefree yet somewhat smug smile. That look of self-satisfaction made me grind my teeth in frustration. But deep down, a sweet and sour feeling spread through my heart. I glared at him and turned back inside. When I changed clothes and went downstairs, Vince was already waiting in the dining room. "You must be hungry, let's eat first." He naturally got up and pulled me to sit beside him. The food was all to my taste, which surprised me. But I didn't have much of an appetite. In 3 days, it would be my wedding with Steve. The Kirby family had already accepted the Madden family's betrothal gifts. Over the years, the Kirby family's business had relied heavily on the Madden family. To put it bluntly, it was the Kirby family that needed this marriage, not the Madden family. And certainly not me. But no one in the Kirby family cared about that. "Don't like it?" Vince noticed my lack of enthusiasm and put down his chopsticks. "I'll take you out to eat." "Vince," I stirred the porridge in my bowl, deep in thought. "In 3 days, it's my wedding. You're still going back?" Vince looked at me with a blank expression. "Hayley, do you really love him that much?" I couldn't help but laugh at myself. Love? Maybe I did love him once. When we first poured our hearts out to each other. How could there not have been genuine feelings back then? But when he grew tired and bored, how could I not feel it? "Vince," I looked up at him, my eyes slightly red but still smiling. "Can you make me happy for these 3 days?" Vince seemed like he wanted to laugh, maybe even light a cigarette. But he couldn't find his pack. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a moment. Then he slowly spoke. "What about after 3 days, Hayley? After 3 days, do I just watch you go back and get married with another man? Just pretend it was all a dream? Aren't you happy, Vince?" I asked quietly, clearly lacking confidence. Vince laughed this time. "Hayley, of course, I'm happy. Isn't that the best of both worlds?" I pretended to be carefree. "The best of both worlds," Vince muttered softly, his eyes fixed on my face. His smile turned back into that previous one. "Hayley, whatever you say, as long as you're happy." That night, Vince took me out for a ride on his motorcycle. We rode through the entire city, oblivious to everyone around us. Hidden under the helmet, there was nothing to worry about. I had never felt my soul so free before. As I waved my arms and shouted without a care in the world, the Hayley Kirby who was always bound by strict manners seemed to break free from another layer of her cocoon. And little did I know, while I was enjoying my last moments of freedom, my fiancé Steve Madden, who had long lost any feelings for me, would become restless because I had been out of touch for a whole day and night. The last time he called and Hayley's phone was still off, Steve got up and left their wedding room, meeting friends late at night. The girl who danced ballet that night was named Jenna. Originally, Steve left halfway through the event, not very interested. Jenna thought he wouldn't look for her again, but to her surprise, Steve came to her college to pick her up late at night. As they left the dorm, Jenna had an evil thought. Steve was generous, but he was about to get married. Jenna could sense that Steve was only temporarily interested in her. One day, he would discard her like an old shoe. But Jenna was well aware that she couldn't find a man with better conditions than Steve. She wanted to make a big score, to ensure a comfortable life for herself and her child. Even if she couldn't keep the baby, she could still demand a huge sum of money. Tonight, it seemed like even the gods were helping her, as she was ovulating. After leaving the dorm, Jenna took out the condoms she had prepared in advance. She carefully poked holes in them one by one. Perhaps because she was still a student, Steve didn't guard against her much. And she was determined to seize this opportunity. After a few rounds of drinks, Steve still couldn't muster any enthusiasm. "Steve, did your fiancé cause trouble when you got back last night?" Steve glanced at the man slumped on the sofa. "She dares to cause trouble with me? That's good. I thought your fiancé would have cried and fought with you after seeing you fooling around with another girl. I didn't expect your fiancé to have such a good temper, to tolerate all this." Steve suddenly put down his glass. "Did Hayley come by last night?" "Yeah, I ran into her when I went out to take a call. We exchanged a few words." "Did she cry?" "She seemed to have cried. Her eyes were really red." Steve felt most of his displeasure dissipate in an instant. So she was really jealous and angry this time. That's why she hid away and turned off her phone. Steve's mood improved, and even Jenna beside him seemed more pleasing to the eye. This girl had used some kind of perfume tonight that almost made him lose control. Steve pulled her into his arms, and Jenna straddled him. "Mr. Madden, you won't leave me behind tonight, will you?" He pinched Jenna's cheek. "Tonight is the last time, let's have a good time." "Why the last time?" "Because the day after tomorrow, I'm getting married." "So what if you're getting married? Does that mean you won't come out to play anymore?" Steve chuckled, pulling Jenna up with him. "Of course, once I'm married, I won't play around anymore." He then looked back at the people in the room. "Did you all hear that?" He smiled somewhat roguishly, but there was a hint of serious humor in his voice. "From now on, I'll only have my wife." When Steve and Jenna were messing around, Vince took me to a small competition. Those racers all had their girlfriends with them. Naturally, Vince brought me along too. "Vince, why are you making an exception this time?" "Yeah, Vince, you never bring women along before." Vince picked up his helmet and pretended to hit them. The guy screamed and hid behind me. "Help, Vince's girlfriend." I was stunned for a moment and instinctively wanted to explain. But Vince glanced at me, reached out, and pulled me over. "Don't tease her, she's shy." "Vince, so you do have a soft spot for beauty." "That's because his girlfriend is too beautiful." "All right, the race is about to start." Vince ignored them, picked up the helmet, and helped me put it on. "The car might go very fast later. If you get scared, just tell me to stop." "I'm not scared." Vince looked up at me, gave a roguish smile. "Then if you get scared, just hold on to me." "I'm not scared. I didn't even make a sound of fear on the way here." Vince didn't say much, just smiled. It was only after the race started that I realized the previous rides were just child's play. When the speed picked up and we drifted around sharp turns, I finally screamed in fear and hugged Vince's waist tightly. "Hayley, are you scared?" In the rush of wind, Vince shouted at me. I was scared to death, but still closed my eyes and shouted back, "I'm not scared." Vince's laughter was wild and unrestrained, echoing in the fierce wind. "Hayley, hold on to me, hold on tighter." I obediently hugged him tightly, and the car's speed instantly reached its limit. As expected, Vince won first place again. When we stopped at the finish line, he parked the car and carried me out. My legs were so weak I couldn't stand. He held me tightly and took off the helmet. In that moment, all the bright lights went out. Only the stars above us, distant and dim. Vince lowered his head and kissed me deeply. "Hayley, let's elope." "Do you dare?" His eyes were so bright, and the scar on his jaw made him look wild. I could feel the burning love in his eyes. Maybe it was love. No one could resist his charm. Not even the most timid and obedient Hayley Kirby. For a moment, I really wanted to nod. To leave everything behind and just go. Even if it meant wandering, living without a home. It would be better than being manipulated like this. But reality is so cruel. The last shred of rationality still bound me. I didn't answer, just stood on tiptoe and kissed him. "Vince Dearden, I want you." The stars on the mountaintop still had a faint glow. But at the foot of the mountain, it was already deeply dark. Everything was silent. Only the occasional soft moan came from the car parked under the tree. The back seat was spacious, Vince's clothes scattered as he leaned on the seat. One hand protected my head. But soon, I had no strength left. I lay limply and wetly on his chest. Vince chuckled lightly, brushing away my wet hair from my forehead. "Can't go on?" I had no strength to speak, my mind was muddled. Such a cute little thing, how could it become more terrifying day by day? I felt like I was burning with fever. Sweating constantly, trembling constantly. Vince turned over and pinned me down. His tall and solid body, strong and powerful. Only then did I vaguely realize I was drawn to strength. I liked this feeling of absolute domination, liked Vince's strong and assertive nature. But he would only be gentle with me. We used to just nod in passing. Both living in the capital, but only had a few encounters. The most intimate time together was just these past 2 days. But he seemed to give me a full sense of security. Clearly, he had a face that looked unfaithful. Clearly, he had a notorious reputation. But inexplicably, he made people feel they could trust him. I closed my eyes and let my senses take over. That night, Vince and I both gave our all. I don't remember when it ended. I only remember when everything finally calmed down. I was wrapped in Vince's coat, sitting in his arms. We just quietly embraced, kissing lightly. Waiting for dawn. Waiting for everything to return to the beginning. I spent the last day at Vince's house. When I woke up, it was already 2 in the afternoon. I went to take a comfortable bath. As I stood in front of the sink, preparing to blow dry my hair, Vince pushed the door open and walked in. He didn't say anything, just took the hairdryer from my hand. When my hair was half dry, I suddenly started to cry. Vince put down the hairdryer, cupped my face, and kissed the tears at the corners of my eyes. In the mirror, I saw the faded red string on his left wrist. It was tied in a vajra knot, which looked familiar. Have you been wearing this red string for a long time? Yeah, almost 4 years. Which girl gave it to you? Vince smiled. I'm superstitious. I got it from a temple as a protective charm. I think I had one like that too, but I lost it somewhere. Hayley, Vince lowered his head, his forehead lightly touching mine. Are you going back? Yeah. I didn't dare to look up at him, just gently touched the scar on his jaw. How did you get this scar? It's normal to get injured in racing. Be more careful in the future. I forced a carefree smile again. After all, such a handsome face, it wouldn't be good to leave a scar. Is it just the face that's handsome? Your body is good too. And you're great in bed, with lots of tricks. After so many relationships, there's still some benefit. Hayley. Yeah. I've never been in a relationship before. Vince didn't seem to like explaining, frowning slightly. You might not believe it, but I've never been interested in women. Why? Too noisy. Vince lowered his eyes, looking at me, and wiped away the tear hanging on my eyelash. Hayley. Tomorrow, I'll wait for you outside the hall. Don't worry, I won't pester you. If you don't come, I promise I'll never appear in front of you again. Vince, I wanted to say, don't be like this. People already looked at you with colored glasses. If you do something so absurd again, your reputation will be completely ruined. After all, I'm engaged to Steve Madden. Everyone knows, I'm going to marry him. Hayley, we only live this life. I hope you live freely and wantonly. After learning that I had returned to the wedding house, Steve quickly came back too. He still had the smell of alcohol on him, and his face looked tired and haggard. He took off his suit jacket and casually threw it at the entrance. Hayley, he looked at me, with a gentleness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Honey, he walked up to me, half-kneeled, and held my hand. Tomorrow is our wedding. From now on, let's live well together, okay? I looked at the man in front of me. I couldn't deny that I had loved him before. I had once had expectations of him. In the Kirby family, I was not valued and never received love. I hoped that my future husband could love and protect me wholeheartedly. I had fantasized about my future married life. I had fantasized about growing old together with Steve in mutual affection. But unfortunately, a fantasy is just a fantasy. I gently pulled my hand away. Go take a bath and rest. What about you? I want to rest too. I have to get up early tomorrow. After saying that, I stood up and walked out. The car from the Kirby family is coming to pick me up soon. According to the rules, I have to stay at my parents' house tonight. Then I'll see you out. Steve seemed like the most gentle and considerate husband in the world, personally seeing me to the car. I sat in the car, watching him stand in the night, seeing me off. I didn't understand, what was the point of this deep affection, if it was just an act? My phone suddenly rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it. It was a friend request from a stranger. After accepting, the person quickly sent several photos and videos. Miss Kirby, I didn't want to disturb you. But Steve Madden went too far. I was just after his money, but now, I've been fired, my reputation is ruined, and I have nothing left. Miss Kirby, Steve Madden said he hasn't loved you for a long time, he's marrying you only because you're clean, he's your first and only man. Believe me, even after you get married, he won't settle down. Because Miss Kirby, you can't do what I did. After reading the girl's message, I opened the photos. With just a quick glance, I shut them off with trembling hands. Those images were utterly obscene to the extreme. In Steve's eyes, because he paid, he could do whatever he wanted with those girls. Should I thank him for not loving me, but still respecting me as his wife, and not doing such disgusting things to me? On the day of the wedding, I woke up very early. And I finally made up my mind. After getting ready, I took out some documents from the room safe. Then, I knocked on my father and stepmother's door. My biological mother came from a scholarly family, but she passed away not long after giving birth to me. She left me a small portion of the Kirby family's shares, and some jewelry that my maternal grandfather's family had given her as dowry when she married. I kept her favorite pair of white jade bracelets, which she never took off. The rest, I gave to them. The Kirby family has raised me for 23 years. Consider these things as my repayment for the upbringing. My father and stepmother were both very surprised, because they had long wanted the inheritance my mother left me. But I had always refused to give in. I always felt that this was the last memory my mother left me, and I had to hold on to it. But now I had come to understand. My mother died of depression. It was clear that the Kirby family was not a good place to end up. Being a daughter of the Kirby family was not a good thing. But just as they always said, since I had enjoyed 20-some years of wealth and protection, I naturally should make sacrifices for the Kirby family. But now, with everything given to them, I no longer owe the Kirby family. The dowry from the Madden family was not in my hands. The Madden family's business helped to the Kirby family benefited my father and stepmother, and my stepmother's son. So, I also did not owe the Madden family. As for the mess that would follow, let the Madden family and the Kirby family sort it out. My father didn't know my plans and praised me with great satisfaction. You're getting married, and you've finally matured, knowing to give back to your parents and elders. My stepmother also smiled warmly. From now on, you'll be the young lady of the Madden family. Things are different now, and your mother will be at peace in her grave. I smiled and didn't say much. Remember, once you're married, you can't act spoiled anymore. You turned off your phone and disappeared these past few days. That was really too willful. Fortunately, Steve didn't hold it against you. If he had gotten angry and called off the wedding, you wouldn't have time to cry. In the future, after you marry, make sure to win Steve's heart. Help the Kirby family more. If your maternal family is well, your own life will be better too. For the first time, my father looked at me with complete satisfaction. Maybe in his eyes, I was the most successful product he ever sold. And never his own flesh and blood. A living person, with feelings that could be hurt and saddened. There were 30 minutes left until the wedding. I took off my shawl. The wedding dress was beautiful and intricate, revealing my shoulders, neck, and entire back. The makeup artist smiled and said, "Miss Kirby, let me cover this mark here for you." She pointed to the love bite on my neck. "You and Mr. Madden are really in love." But I shook my head. "No need, just leave it as it is." The makeup artist adjusted my veil and dress, handed me the bridal bouquet. I held the bouquet and stood up. The pair of white jade bracelets my mother loved were on my wrists. When I stood up, they clinked together, making a crisp sound. The heavy fog in my heart seemed to be lifted by an invisible hand. Dazzling sunlight shone through the gap. I knew that from this moment on, everything would be different. As I walked out, my phone vibrated slightly. It was a message from Vince. "Hayley, I'm waiting for you." I didn't reply, put the phone back in my handbag, and stepped out of the dressing room. From a distance, I saw Steve Madden. And he saw me too. I saw the amazement and joy in his eyes. The groom, as handsome as ever, looked even more dashing on this triumphant day. I stopped in my tracks, and for a moment, it felt like I was back in the year we got engaged. It was my mother's death anniversary. Steve accompanied me to the temple. I had personally woven a red string with a diamond knot and had it blessed by the temple's abbot. It was offered for 3 days and nights before the Buddha, and I was eager to give it to Steve. But he didn't believe in such things and didn't seem to value my gesture. He just looked at it and didn't have any intention of wearing it. I was a bit disappointed at the time, but I also thought that most men didn't like these things. It was normal. I shouldn't force others to cater to my preferences. That red string was later hung on the wishing tree in the temple, along with my wish plaque. To this day, I still clearly remember the wish I made. "May I find someone whose heart will stay with mine, and we will never part." My vision suddenly blurred, and Steve's face became indistinct. I had once genuinely loved him. My feelings back then were true. So I don't regret it. But now, I have truly let go. Whoever wants to be the good girl can go ahead and be one. For someone who never had a rebellious phase. Once you decide to rebel completely, it can be quite frightening. Steve was holding the groom's bouquet when he walked up to me. The smile on his face froze comically. He saw the kiss marks on my neck. They were mottled, varying in depth. And he remembered that it had been a long time since we had been together. His expression twisted into something strange and contorted, and he almost dropped the bouquet. Hayley, what is this? What did you do, Hayley? Who were you with these 3 days? His voice was hoarse, and anger filled his eyes. I couldn't help but chuckle lightly, just trying something new. Why are you so mad? Or is it that only you can do it, and I can't? Trying something new? Steve mumbled, repeating the words, and then suddenly threw the bouquet to the ground with force. The surrounding crowd was instantly stunned into silence by this sudden change. The elders of the Kirby and Madden families all looked over. I raised an eyebrow slightly, my smile calm. Yeah, didn't you try it? Got addicted, didn't you? Hayley Kirby. I took a slow step back. I tried it too. And after trying it, I realized you're actually pretty boring, not as exciting as him. So, I placed the bouquet on the ground and looked at him with an even deeper smile. Steve Madden, I won't marry you. As I finished saying this, there was a momentary buzzing in my ears. Then, as if I had gone deaf, the whole world was deathly silent. But after the silence, the world became vibrant again. I felt the last layer of my cocoon completely peel away. My body and soul felt incredibly free. I turned and walked out. The expressions on the faces of the Kirby family were spectacular. My father and stepmother seemed completely stunned, standing there motionless. It wasn't until I had walked far away that my father's angry roar reached me. But I didn't look back. I gathered the complex hem of my wedding dress in my hands. I had secretly swapped my high heels for comfortable sneakers a long time ago. I started running forward, across the smooth, green lawn, through archways entwined with roses. Finally, when I ran out of that big door, I stopped and looked back. The noisy, chaotic crowd seemed like a ridiculous world. Once I ran out of this door, I would never look back again. Vince didn't drive. He was unusually dressed in a black suit, leaning against a heavy motorcycle. This was the first time I had seen him in a suit. The phrase suit thug instantly popped into my head. I had really gone bad. At this moment, what I was thinking was, I really wanted to do it with him in a suit. His hair seemed to be specially styled, looking particularly sharp. It was as if he was the one getting married today, as the groom. I stopped and stood in the sunlight looking at him. And he saw me too. The moment he saw me, he immediately stood up straight. This usually rebellious person was now nervously pressing his lips together. His eyes were filled with joy, disbelief, but mostly tender affection. Hayley, he called my name softly. With his long legs, he took a few strides to reach me. The hem of my wedding dress spread out, creating a cascading wave-like arc in the air. The green trees around us swirled, painting spots of color across the blue sky. Vince, I'm so dizzy, please put me down. I almost screamed, holding on to him tightly, trembling as I pleaded. He obediently stopped. But as soon as he did, he kissed me fiercely. Hayley, do you know, I didn't sleep at all last night. I finally understand what it means to live each day like a year. Vince held me tightly, as if letting go would make me fly away. From now on, you can't leave my sight for even a minute. Didn't you say you wanted me to live freely and unrestrained? You just live freely and unrestrained, and I'll follow you. Always follow me? Always follow you. Won't you get bored? Won't you get tired? Won't you want to try something new? I've kept myself pure for 26 years, waiting for this day. Only a fool would do something so stupid. So that day, was your first time? I was surprised, considering how he didn't seem like it that night. Wasn't I exceptionally talented, long-lasting, and impressive? Vince was proud, but also a bit embarrassed. I couldn't help but laugh. Vince lowered his head and kissed me again. You have no idea how hard I tried to make sure you wouldn't be disappointed, to make you feel good. Then, I'll reward you well tonight. I tilted my face up and kissed him, but you have to wear this suit. When Steve chased after me, he saw me getting on the back of Vince's motorcycle. He was furious, but I calmly flipped him off. The motorcycle roared away, and neither Vince nor I cared if Steve chased us. He drove me through the bustling city, and after a while, he suddenly stopped. It was a very unique custom workshop. Vince took me inside, and a beautiful lady there brought out a handmade wedding dress. It was simple and elegant, with ballet elements subtly incorporated. I fell in love with it at first sight. Vince urged me to try on the wedding dress. After changing into it, the lady named Jenna helped me take down my hair and styled it into a sleek bun. When I came out, Vince's gaze made that lady laugh. "Do I look good?" I twirled with the skirt, making a perfect ballet gesture, and looked at Vince with a smile. He stared at me, and suddenly his eyes turned red. "Vince, what's wrong?" I was a bit surprised. After a while, he seemed to calm his emotions. "Hayley, do you remember how long it's been since you last danced?" I was stunned. To be precise, since I got engaged to Steve. My father and stepmother wouldn't let me continue dancing. They said that I would marry into the Madden family and become a lady of the house. Dancing on stage was not suitable for my status. With a few words, they easily crushed my dreams and ambitions. At 19, I was used to being obedient and docile. I mustered up the courage to fight for myself once. After being rejected, I just cried secretly and then went along with their plans. Later, during the best 6 months of my relationship with Steve, I asked him if I could continue ballet in the future. What did Steve say? "Isn't it good to be a pampered lady of the house? Ballet is so exhausting, look at how deformed your feet are, don't you find it ugly?" At that time, I liked him so much that I only had eyes for him. Girls always want to be perfect in the eyes of the one they like. I was no different. For a long time, I didn't even dare to let Steve see my feet. "Hayley, do you know that you were glowing just now?" As tears fell, Vince tightly embraced me. "I want you to be the dazzling Hayley Kirby. Just like when I first saw you dance, radiant and unstoppable." "You've seen me dance?" "To be precise, I've seen every one of your performances." Vince and I traveled to many places. We didn't have a wedding, but it felt like a honeymoon. That lady made many beautiful dresses for me. When we left that day, Vince took them all. He seemed to love seeing me dressed beautifully in every lovely place in the world. I don't know when he started preparing, or how long he prepared. And perhaps I will never know his thoughts during this time. So, what was he feeling when he prepared all this? I dared not imagine. But by fate's grace, I didn't miss out in the end. When we were ready to return to the capital, it was already late autumn. 2 months had passed since that wedding. But clearly, the turmoil hadn't subsided. The Madden family vented their anger on the Kirby family, suppressing them in business everywhere. Steve's reaction, however, exceeded my expectations. He accepted the only media interview. In the interview, he said, "My wife Hayley Kirby was maliciously manipulated into doing something foolish. She is innocent and naive, known as the good girl of the capital. Everyone knows what kind of reputation that young Dearden has. I don't know what means he used to deceive my wife into eloping with him. I will never let this matter rest, but I am still willing to give my wife Hayley one last chance. As long as she returns, the doors of the Madden family will remain open to her. I, Steve Madden, will forgive and forget." His deep affection was truly moving. With these words, the already notorious Vince became even more condemned by everyone. People firmly believed that I, the good girl, was deceived by Vince. And Steve's willingness to give me a chance to return was seen as a grace I should be grateful for. If it were the old me, I would have been trembling with fear. Afraid of damaging my reputation, afraid of not washing away the stains on me. Afraid of being criticized and scolded, afraid of shaming my deceased mother. But now, I no longer care about these so-called reputations. The day I returned to the capital, I went to see Steve. "Do you remember Jenna?" I got straight to the point. Steve's expression changed immediately. How could he not remember? That woman had poked holes in the condoms, hoping to trap him with a child. Honestly, he'd seen such dirty tricks and traps too many times. So, he easily saw through it. Not only did Jenna's scheme fail, but he also used some means to get her expelled from school. This matter had already faded without a trace. Steve was puzzled as to how I knew about it. "If you don't want the media and your family elders to know about your sordid affairs with her, then stop spreading rumors that damage Vince's reputation." I handed Steve one of the photos. "You wouldn't want these photos to be seen by others, right?" Steve's face was full of suppressed anger and surprise. "So you're doing all this for Vince?" "Hayley, do you really care about him that much?" "I'm just telling the truth. Vince didn't deceive or manipulate me. Every decision I've made is because I wanted to make them." "What about your reputation, Hayley?" "I don't care." "And your mother, don't you care about her?" I stood up and smiled. My mother probably wouldn't want me to be a puppet like obedient girl. But Hayley, can you really rely on a man like Vince Dearden? Do you know how reckless his past was? Is it more reckless than yours? Your reputation is so good, but in reality? Hayley, you're still too naive. All men in this world are the same, they all have periods of boredom, times when they get tired. So should I turn a blind eye and endure it forever? What if Vince Dearden becomes like that one day? He won't. How are you so sure he won't? I just am. Maybe it's the red string he has worn on his hand for 4 years without taking it off. Maybe it's the diary he hid in his study, filled with my name. Maybe it's the hundreds of photos he took at every one of my performances. Maybe it's the focused and sincere look in his eyes every time he sees me. Maybe it's because he gave me the courage to start pursuing my dreams. A good partner makes the other person better and brighter. Steve just wanted me to be a good wife and mother. Locked in a beautiful big house, a beautiful decoration. But Vince made me a carefree yet confident child. I just ran forward, and he will always be behind me. The year Vince and I registered our marriage, Jenna, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly did something big. Maybe life was too hard, maybe she couldn't let go of her deep hatred for Steve Madden. Jenna used those photos to get a large sum of money. Then she ran away. Overnight, those photos spread to every corner of the capital. Steve's reputation was ruined, abandoned by his family, and replaced. As people pieced together the timeline, the public perception of Vince and me naturally began to reverse. But through it all, Vince and I remained the same, laughing it off and not caring. On the day we received our marriage certificate, I took Vince to a temple. In the temple, there was an eternal light I had lit for my mother. Vince and I knelt in front of her memorial plaque for a long time. After I got up, Vince asked me to go out first. He said he had a few words to say to my mom. I didn't know what he wanted to say, but I let him be. While waiting, I went to the wishing tree. I found the wish plaque I had hung up years ago. The red string had been stolen by Vince, but the plaque was still there. I noticed there was another plaque next to it. It was tied firmly to mine with a red thread. The handwriting on it was strong and powerful. I recognized it as Vince's at a glance. He had written 2 sentences. Hayley, can you see me a little earlier? Holding the wish plaque, my tears suddenly flowed uncontrollably. People were coming and going, the temple was bustling. I heard someone calling my name loudly. Turning around, I saw Vince. He stood on the steps, dressed in a white shirt and black pants, looking handsome and dazzling. The moment he saw me, his eyes softened with a gentle smile. I, too, smiled through my tears and waved at him vigorously. Vince, I see you.